18th. If I can get a motion on the minutes, please. We do have minutes approved with second. Minutes will stand without objection. Before we begin, the chair would like to recognize Commissioner Highlander and welcome him to our session this afternoon. Under ordinances on final reading this evening, under finance, item B. Any questions or comments on final reading for these items? All right, moving into seeing no lights. Under planning, we have several items that are on second and final read. Does council have any concerns or questions on any items on final read? If not, tonight I will group these as a package. And I'm seeing Councilman Smith, I do see your light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the planning items on final read this evening, we do have one item that I'm going to be moving to defer, and that would be item F.
Item F.
I have no issue with the rest of the items being packaged, sir.
Item F, actually, if that is based on our conversation, if you would mind, take a look at ordinances under first reading, planning item A.
Okay.
That is the one.
Got it.
Got it. Are we good now?
Yes, sir.
I know they're
Yeah, same thing. Yep. Got
I
it.
know they're a little confusing.
Yep, they're the same, but
Okay.
not. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate your attention to that. So I will move our final reads as a package this afternoon. So moving into Parks and Public Works. Councilman Smith, are you still okay with the venue rates for Greenway? Okay, very good. Seeing no lights. Under ordinances, under first reading, planning item A is in District 4. This is a case that we heard last week where there is a boundary dispute, and the applicant has reached out to me and asked for a deferral on that item, planning A, till August 2nd as they continue to meet with the constituents. I did spend some time Sunday afternoon at several homes in the area, and I think we're okay, but that boundary dispute, they're hoping to work through some issues. But we can give them until August 2nd. I do appreciate that. Councilwoman Knoll, items B and C are deferred from last week. Are you ready to move on those? Okay, very good. We will go through the process of first read with a public hearing on these items. So I do appreciate your diligence in working through those. Resolutions under finance. This was covered by Mr. Goldberg. I don't know if he's, oh, there he is. Brent, anything to add other than what we talked about last week in agenda session? So, and I'm seeing no lights on that. So thank you. If you take a look at our purchases, we have 12 items, 2 emergency items. We do have no RFPs this evening. If you'll take a look at your purchases and hit your light if you have any questions. Purchases, for those of you who are new to council, we received earlier in the week, so we've had an opportunity to ask questions with staff and address those questions if we needed to. So if you're wondering why we have no questions, if you'll take a look at our July 26th agenda, you'll notice several items under and related to the ARP, which for the record, we will have a continuing discussion next Tuesday in chambers starting at 10:30 to cover the rest of the items. We got through about a third of them today. So if you're interested in the ARP discussion, please join us next Tuesday at 10:30 for a special session of strategic planning. But getting back to our agenda, we will have ordinances on final reading of the first reading items that we covered tonight. We have resolutions under council office. We have reappointments to the Police Advisory Board. And I appreciate each and every one of you presenting your appointments to the Police Advisory Board. Under economic development, we have 2 Habitat for Humanity grant, short-term vacation rental application. I will assume that is prior moratorium. I'm getting a head nod from the administration. Thank you. And then we have leases for the Forgotten Child Fund on Main Street. If you'll take a look at any of those items, we also have a resolution. If now would be a good opportunity on this item for Joe, do you want to talk a little more in depth about items H and I on next week's agenda regarding the South Broad or Mr. Goldberg?
Yeah, I defer to Mr. Goldberg or Jermaine.
You pass that hot potato around whoever you want to, but I had a feeling from this morning's session that we probably need a little more information on what H and I are addressing next week.
Thank you, Chairman Ledford. So items H and I basically allow the city of Chattanooga, which this is allowed under the TIF policy that was adopted by City Council back in 2015, that when the city is the applicant for a TIF, it essentially allows the city to not go through all of the requirements that would be required for a private developer, to give the city some flexibility in initiating a city TIF. And so that is sort of constructed and embedded in the language of the resolution that was adopted to govern the TIF policies by City Council back in 2015. We've actually passed a resolution, like a similar resolution in the past. When we did the East Chattanooga Rising TIF, we also passed a similar resolution because the city was the applicant in that case as well. The second item refers to everything that we are doing as part of the TIF and that is contemplated as part of the TIF project, including the building of the stadium and the completion of unfunded portions of the Alton Park connector. Those are all capital things that are not currently funded. And so the purpose of TIF obviously has to meet the but-for requirement. So but for the TIF, those things would not happen because there's currently no funding set aside for those things. So those are what those two things articulate.
Very good. I do have a light for you, Jermaine Homewall. Councilwoman Hill, see your light.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate you anticipating that we would have some questions about this. So, Jermaine, I understand that it's within our ordinances that we are not required to go through all the steps, but this is item H is especially vague, that we are authorizing the exemption of, quote, certain procedures of the application process. Will you please walk us through the certain procedures of the application process that we are authorizing exemption of ourselves?
Sure. So what we are doing is we are following the state policy for how a TIF is typically approved according to state guidelines. And so for this, what we would do is we would waive the written application, because I don't think that we need to apply to ourselves for the TIF. We would waive the application fee because I don't think that we need to pay ourselves the application fee. And then, of course, associated with the application itself is also the application review committee. As this is going to be coming before both the county commission and the city council, as well as two industrial development boards, which is unusual for a TIF in that it goes before both the county industrial development board and the city's industrial development board. And because the application review committee would normally be associated with reviewing an actual written application from a developer, those would be the things that we would be waiving.
So the application review committee, on the outside of it, it sounds like it's a large group of community people reviewing, but from the TIF review committee that we just have formed in relation to the TIF in Hickson Districts 2 and 3, I understand that that review committee is a highly skilled group of real estate and legal professionals that are looking at a dense stack of legal documents. And that is what you're referring to here, correct?
That is correct. So that's typically 5 people. So according to the TIF policy that we've adopted, it usually is, to Councilwoman Hill's point, 2 people that are selected by the mayor, 2 selected by the city council, and then 1 person from the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. And so, yeah, it's not like a large community gathering. It's a very
No.
technical review meeting. So you're just to repeat back to you. So you're saying because we're going to have the city council, the county commission, and the IDBs from both of those, you have enough technical expertise plus city and county attorneys looking at all of these documents.
We believe that all of our elected officials, plus the Industrial Development Board meeting members, have the expertise needed to review this.
Okay. Okay, that's all my questions about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Hill. Dr. Burrs.
So what's the timeline you say? Let's say next week we say, okay, then what?
Well, you all would not be voting on the TIF until August.
Mhm.
And so we actually have there is an industrial development board meeting this week before the county. There will be an industrial development board meeting before the city's industrial development board on August the 1st. And then the county commission and both the city of Chattanooga would be looking at TIF votes in the month of August for actual approval of the TIF. So those votes would not occur until August.
August 9th, I think is.
August 9th for the city council. That's right.
Okay, and we're going to be getting an education session on this beginning today?
Well, we started last week, but we'll continue today. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because there were a lot of questions.
Yes,
that
ma'am.
I understand are going to be answered.
Yes.
The one question that I still have is why the rush? Is there a reason to rush this?
We don't look at it as a rush, given that the South Broad study was completed back in 2018. We lost a few years because of the pandemic. I certainly think that when you look at the time that we've lost just in terms of priorities from local governments, not just for the city of Chattanooga, but across the country, I think a lot of local governments had other priorities in the years that we lost due to COVID. So we don't look at it
it's
as
a great
rush.
answer. And it's it's a good answer. All right. Except that's not what I'm saying. So this has all kinds of implications, right?
It does.
And I'm not against the project, but I think at least I have to do due diligence, and there's a lot of budgetary implications. And I'm just wondering, for us to be comfortable because of the amount and everything,
Yes, ma'am.
is there a reason why August 9th is sacrosanct?
We need to break ground in terms of construction for the project because although for us, and let me be very clear about this, for the administration, this project is about future development.
Yeah, I understand
however,
that.
I'm going to answer your question. However, as part of the future development, as the key to that, there is the component of baseball, and there is a component of building a stadium. And Major League Baseball has made it very clear that if the local governments can't figure out how to provide new facilities for the Lookouts, then the Major League Baseball stands to pull the Lookouts from the market.
So it's the Lookouts that are putting the pressure on, or the relationship with the Lookouts.
No, I would say that we would like to keep the Lookouts here, but I think the answer is Major League Baseball. I think, and we have the ownership from the Lookouts here today. I think that they certainly are not putting pressure on us to do this. We had I believe it was the vice president for player personnel for the Cincinnati Reds,
Mhm.
which is the Major League Baseball team that the Lookouts are affiliated with, who actually said and spoke to the Times Free Press last week and basically said, "Hey, look, this unfortunately, if you look at it as a rush, we understand, but this is pressure that is coming from Major League Baseball."
Okay. And so I had forwarded to Brent, so I'll put out there, and I hope whoever's here from the Lookouts will be responding to this. There were several things in the Lookouts promised to put a team here, and the fact that they would be here forever, 30 years, and I think I put it in the email, given the structure is illusory. And I want that firm because the answers to make sense. And if they do, that's great. I'm still seeing some smoke and mirrors. And I want everything when this happens to be really solid and inure to total community, not just, and it is catalytic. It's great. I mean,
Sure.
please don't take that as against, but
Sure.
I just do have a fiduciary responsibility. And so I do need to ask these questions. So whoever's here from the lookouts, those are the kind of things I'll be asking. Okay, I think I got it. Thank you very
And
much.
we will have a special committee meeting held
I-
today, so we'll
I
have plenty of
got it.
opportunity for
I got it.
presentations and
I
questions.
got it.
So moving on to items J and K under fire. Chief, you have anything you need to add? These are the wireless communication leases. Yeah, I'm not seeing any lights. You've done this once or twice, Chief. Under Mayor's office, we do have a whole list of items concerning the ARP funds. I will assume there will be no questions as we will have a special session next Tuesday starting at 10:30, if I haven't mentioned that before. I want to make sure the public is aware that we will be discussing those in depth, and there's quite a few of those. Okay. We will have also, Mr. Attorney, a special short-term vacation rental appeal hearing. You want to tell us a little bit about that on the 26th?
Normally, you will have a presentation by your staff here regarding that meeting on here, an opportunity for the opponents and the proponents to actually talk about the short-term vacation rental. This is something that was pending before the moratorium, or an application that was pending before the moratorium. So we'll follow the normal process that we had previously at that point.
Very good. And this is in District 6, Dr. Burr. So,
Yes.
all right. Seeing no lights, we will move into future considerations. If you would, take a look at future considerations and hit your light if you have any questions or concerns about any items in future considerations. I think it's interesting to note under finance item A that the bid, or the DCA as it's now known, will present their budget. And then also they're moving into an alignment with our financial calendar year so that we can better have more time, if you will, to address any questions that they have during it for their budget when it comes before us to approve. So special note on that. Seeing no lights on future considerations, we do not have any department reports this afternoon, but we do have a special called Economic Development Committee meeting that Madam Chair Coonrod will now take over the center chair, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, put this seat down. son. Thank you. Can we get approval of the minutes? All right, so we read last week, the ordinance and resolutions of last week. So Ms. Karen, if you will start next week. The resolution 7, resolution D.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to award up to $40,000 to Habitat for Humanity of Greater Chattanooga area to construct a house at 278 West 36th Street for affordable home ownership.
7E.
A resolution approving short-term vacation rental application number 18 STVR 00170 for property located at 1789 East 12th Street.
7F.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a second agreement to exercise option to renew with the Forgotten Child Fund, Inc. in substantially the form attached to lease approximately 1,142 square feet of office space at 1715 East Main Street, identified as tax map number 156BD011 for an additional term of 3 months through October 31st, 2022 for the rent of $1.
7G.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a second agreement to exercise the option to renew with the Forgotten Child Fund in substantially the form attached to lease approximately 19,516 square feet of warehouse space at 1815 East Main Street, identified as tax map number 156BD009, for an additional term of 3 months through October 31st, 2022, for the rent of $1 per term.
7H.
A resolution authorizing the exception of the City of Chattanooga and its affiliated boards and commissions from certain procedures of the application process for tax increment financing when the City of Chattanooga and its affiliate boards and commissions initiate the TIF approval process because the City of Chattanooga and its affiliated boards and commissions are seeking approval for the tax increment financing related to the redevelopment of the South Broad District and following all procedures for tax increment finances required by the state of Tennessee.
7I.
A resolution of intent that the proposed City of Chattanooga South Broad District Tax Increment Finance Redevelopment Project will provide necessary improvements to public infrastructure that the City of Chattanooga wants to occur with the proposed times for the project, but does not currently plan to effect in the short term under its existing capital improvement plans or has not fully funded under its existing capital plans. The City Council will consider an economic impact plan prepared and submitted by the City of Chattanooga Industrial Development Board with aid from the City of Chattanooga's Department of Economic Development with respect to the South Broad District project, and the City Council authorizes the City of Chattanooga's Industrial Development Board to hold a public hearing related to the South Broad Tax Increment Financing Economic Impact Plan.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. So we're about to get started. We're going to lay some ground rules. We're going to allow them to complete the entire presentation, and then we're going to open up for questions. Jermaine, listen, I'm not really great at quarterbacking. I'm more better on the field goal end,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
I'm going to need you to loosen your tie because they almost took you down that rabbit hole. And, I don't want to see you get your blood pressure a little frazzled, but just one suggestion.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
can, if you need help, just signal us with the white flag and we'll try to get you some help. Okay, so let's get started.
All right. Well, thank you. So thank you, Councilwoman Coonrod. So today I actually have plenty of help. So there are some people in the audience that I would like to introduce who will all be part of the presentation today. We have our representatives from Core Nashville here. We have Jason Fryer, who is the owner of the Chattanooga Lookouts. We also have McKittrick Simmons, who is one of the financing partners for New City Properties, and Jim Irwin. Unfortunately, Mr. Irwin could not be here today because he had a long planned family vacation. And then we also have the property owners here, Mr. Gary Chazen and Andy Stone. So we've got lots of folks who would like to share all the good information that we have. And so if I could get the slides, we'll start from there. All right. So last week you heard sort of the first part of our presentation about the future of the South Broad District, which we believe is going to be a significant redevelopment story and the narrative for the city of Chattanooga. And so we want to continue that conversation today. Ironically, a lot of the development that we're going to talk about, we're actually going to sort of talk about through the lens of the development that's happened in other cities as a result of baseball. And so we'll ask Mr. Fryer to come up and to say a few words about that. But before we do, we're going to get into some of the questions that you all asked us last week to make sure that we address those on the front end. We'll jump right into those. And then I want to make sure that we have time for Mr. Simmons, as well as Core, as well as Jason. So I'll ask our CFO, Brent Goldberg, to come up and to take it from here, and then I'll come back up in just a moment.
Thanks, Jermaine. I'm not going to repeat everything on this slide. This was same slide we showed last week. One thing though, you'll see in the bottom right corner, it's 1.4 million each instead of 1.5. So I'll get to that. But the number, we've got final projections that have come in as the final numbers that we will use and attach to the resolution. So we've updated some things and actually decreased the amount for the city and county slightly, less than $100,000 change. First thing I want to talk about is the bond structure. This was a question we had last week. So I want to make sure that we all understand what the bond structure looks like. These will be revenue bonds that are issued by the Sports Authority. These are not general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the government. These are revenue bonds issued by the Sports Authority that are backed by identified revenues, rely solely on the ability to pay, and will be secured by lease revenues, parking revenues, stadium sales taxes, and TIF increments. So all the things that we talked about last week, those are the items that will secure these revenue bonds for the Sports Authority. There will be two portions of bonds. Is that on? Yeah. Two portions of bonds. The first portion is the taxable portion. The debt will be serviced by lease payments from the lookouts. Because those are private payments, these have to be taxable bonds. And average debt service for those is a little over $1 million a year throughout the 30 years. And then we have tax exempt portion, and the debt is serviced by TIF increments, sales taxes, parking revenues, and local support. So there are two different portions of bonds that are going to be issued. The taxable bonds are approximately 17 million. The non-taxable or tax exempt are about 63 million. On the tax exempt bonds, the average debt service is approximately 3.6 million per year throughout the life of the bond. And that's assuming we don't do any refinancing or anything, just the full 30-year bond. That will be paid primarily by the TIF increment. You can see there 2.8 million per year is what we expect to pay from TIF increment, 600,000 from sales taxes, and 200,000 from others. So one question we had last week is, what if there's no development? What if we build this stadium and there's no development around the stadium? We would still have baseball. Minor league baseball has only canceled once since 1901, right, Jason? So baseball will still be played if we have a stadium for them to play in. Sales taxes will be generated to cover part of the payment. The lease payment will continue. Parking will continue. So if there is zero development, I mean absolutely zero, that means the city and county are on the hook for $2.8 million a year, split 50-50. And that was a question asked, so we want to make sure to answer that question. What does the end of the world look like? And that's what it would look like. That's the end of the world scenario. But we are at least a little more optimistic than that. We are confident that we will have at least $350 million in development, as I mentioned last week. We still believe 350 million is very conservative, especially since we're looking at nearly $170 million coming from core development, which we've talked about, and they're here today to speak as well. But that $350 million would generate these sources of payment to repay the bonds. These are slightly different than what we presented last week because we did update with our final projections from Younger Associates yesterday. That's the consultant we use for all of our economic development analysis around pilots and TIFs. You can see that they've basically reallocated property and sales taxes to be as accurate as possible, but also very conservative. So property tax increment would cover 58% of the total bonds. The stadium lease would still cover 22%. Sales taxes from the state would cover 12%. Sales taxes locally, 2%. We still show 2% each from the city and the county. So last week, that number was just over 1.5 million. This week, with the final numbers, it's just under 1.5 million, but relatively the same amount. I think that's it for that one. One thing I did want to point out is how this 1.4 million will get paid over time. So it's not the city and county don't have to cut a check for 1.4 million each, tomorrow. This is over time, and it's meant to cover gaps in debt service that we know will exist until the project is more mature. So this is what the payment schedule would look like if there was no development beyond 350 million. Again, we think there will be development above 350 million, but we're being as conservative as possible and using 350. But in fiscal year 25, so 2 full fiscal years from now would be the first time we make a payment. I think I mentioned last week, the bonds that we issue will have capitalized interest so that we don't have to make any payments during the construction of the stadium during that period. So fiscal year 25 is our largest payment. And then you can see the payments are variable for fiscal years 26 through 29. Part of the reason for that is as we've talked about, the structure for parking revenue share decreases over time. So we'll have less money coming in for debt service from parking revenues, although parking is pretty insignificant portion of the repayment plan. But it does alter those, from 39 to 62 to 57, for example. And then for the total amount over 10 years between fiscal year 30 and 40 would be 393,000 each. And that's relatively 30, call it 40,000 a year each of those 10 years, right? Again, that assumes there's no development past 350 million. We believe that we'll be over 350, at least near 400 million after, year 7, year 8, somewhere around that area. At that point, we break even and there's no other payments that we have to make from the city and the county. But that is the total of the $1.4 million the city and county would have to currently put into this with 350 million in development. One thing we were asked for is a cost benefit analysis. So we have two different types of analysis. One, and it'll be attached to the resolution for next week, but the Younger Associates, they do this for all of our TIFs. They did it for the North River TIF that you all have seen, but they do a benefit cost ratio. And the benefit cost ratio for this project is 1.65. So that means for every dollar that we put in the TIF, we get back $1.65. So anything over 1 is good. Anything under 1 is not so good. So this is a good ratio for us to have at 1.65. But we also looked at it as, what are we getting for $1.4 million? So the city and county each put in $1.4 million. On the right-hand side of your screen is what we get for this. So we'll have a new publicly owned regional asset that's $80 million asset. We'll have new revenues for the city's general fund totaling $20 million. That's the portion of the TIF that goes straight to our general fund before it goes into the designated TIF area. We have $40 million for schools that we've talked about. Our new property tax base for the future would be $115 million. So we would go, this is primarily for the US Pipe site. We would go from $2 million of assessed value to over $115 million of assessed value once it's fully developed out based on the plans that we're using for the TIF structure. And then we get to keep the lookouts, which is priceless. We all want the lookouts to stay in town. And then one thing to note, as benefits increase, benefits will increase as development increases. So, once we cross 350 million, we'll have more money for schools, more money for general fund, more money for infrastructure in that TIF area, which means we can build the Alden Park connector quicker. We could put other infrastructure in place quicker. So as development occurs, the faster it occurs, the more benefits we get from it. Lastly, I think this is the last one for me. We had a couple of questions about AT&T Field and Finley Stadium. So what happens to AT&T Field? The property is currently owned by the City Sports Authority. There's a reversion right for that property. So if baseball is no longer played there, the stadium gets demolished, and that property reverts back to River City Company for the nominal consideration of $200. River City would then determine the future of the property in partnership with the city of Chattanooga, whether it's part of the one riverfront plan or some other community visioning process. And then we do not see any impact at all on Finley Stadium. As far as we know, UTC will continue to play games there for the near future. CFC will remain at Finley Stadium. They do have a new executive director, so we actually expect things to improve at Finley Stadium in terms of the number of events they have and the way they operate. So this stadium will have no impact on Finley Stadium whatsoever. That's it for me. I'll be back for questions.
And so part of what we've always said and what we continue to articulate as an administration is that this is a redevelopment story and a redevelopment opportunity. We look at this as an opportunity to revitalize and to recatalyze and to really sort of charge up the next phase of the riverfront. The building that you're seeing here is a building that is going to be occupied. This building has sat vacant for many, many years over in the Onion Bottom community. It is a couple of blocks up from the sanctioned encampment that we have on East 12th Street. And today we were able to announce, with the help of the chamber and with the help of the state and with the help of TVA, a company called iFixit, which will create 200 jobs and bring a tech and distribution center to Chattanooga. So this is a rendering of what iFixit's new office will potentially look like in that space. I tell you about this not because this has anything to do directly with the South Broad site, but because before iFixit decided to go to the Onion Bottom, they looked at a building over in the South Broad area. And they couldn't get that building because it was already under contract, because there's starting to be interest from other companies and from other organizations that are wanting to move into the South Broad area and that are waiting on a catalyst to really sort of catalyze the investment in the area. So we're very proud that iFixit is going to be over in the Onion Bottom and creating 200 jobs. But again, they looked at a site over in the South Broad area that was already under contract to another group. And they wound up going to the Onion Bottom, and we're very happy that they're going to be there. But that is also part of the reason why it's important for us in terms of the timing, to Councilwoman Burz's question of why it's also important to us in terms of how we fund the stadium. We know that there is going to be development. Now and let me be very clear, there will be development one way or the other, whether we do a stadium or not. But as Jim Irwin said when he was here last week, having the stadium here helps us to get and to achieve a level of density and a level of development that we would not otherwise see. And making sure that we can capture the increment that will be created by that development before it comes online would be extremely helpful in helping us to finance the stadium. And so one of the other things that we heard last week was, what about housing? We know that with new development comes new opportunities for housing. And we believe and know that our housing partners will be willing to work with us to bring a mix of market rate, workforce, and affordable housing to the community. We also believe that because of the density that we'll be able to achieve, we should be able to see some real cost savings in terms of housing. And so with that, I'd like to invite Andrew Baird from Core Nashville to come up and talk about the work that they're planning to do in terms of their $160 million investment.
Well, thank you for the intro, Jermaine. I'm Andrew Beard. I'm the Chief Development Officer for Core Development. And also with me is Alex Sherling, who's our CFO, and is here also to kind of help field questions. I'll give you just kind of a brief overview of our plans and involvement in the South Broad District. But I want to start by just a brief intro. Core Development has been actively developing in kind of the Nashville downtown core urban ring neighborhoods for over 20 years. We were started by Mark Deutschman, who also started Village Real Estate back in the 90s. We've been at the forefront of the urban renaissance in Nashville, and continue to focus again in and around Nashville's downtown core, and also kind of the major corridors now, which is kind of the next phase of Nashville's densification. And we're honored to be a part of this transformation. We obviously are a willing participant in kind of the economic trends, but philosophically, we believe in sustainable urbanism. And we find great joy in being involved in neighborhoods. And I would like to say just right out of the gates that we really have fallen in love with the city of Chattanooga, the South Broad District, and the potential for seeing that neighborhood transition and evolve over time. We've done this many times in Nashville, and we've seen this play itself out. A lot of common threads, with these transitioning neighborhoods, but a lot of unique and special circumstances and opportunities, which always makes it fun to be a participant in. It has its challenges, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of the opportunities and the challenges that come along with participating in seeing neighborhoods kind of grow and thrive. The slide that you're looking at just gives you a little bit of a context. I kind of hate that the lighting is a little bit off, so it's kind of hard to discern the properties that we're actually focused on. But in pretty much the center of the slide, you can see there's a red hatched line that surrounds a little bit over 11 acres right at the Wheeling Foundry Trailhead. We have been working with Perimeter Properties for almost a year now, and have been visiting in Chattanooga, meeting with various stakeholders, and have really enjoyed to be a part of a lot of the enthusiasm and optimism around the potential future of this particular site as it's kind of located on the Riverwalk. When we originally came here, we were quite attracted by really three things in this particular neighborhood. One being the possibility of a stadium. Obviously, we were super invested into reading through the South Broad study and the anticipation, although we knew it wasn't for sure, but we knew that the level of commitment from the city was good enough that plans were being made and designed around the potential location of the stadium in this district. So that was a huge motivator for us. Number two, the T-Dot interchange, which we saw as kind of instrumental and catalytic in its own right. And then obviously the third and final phase of the Riverwalk. Our CEO and founder is the former president of Greenways for Nashville and has been working with that organization for over 15 years in the acquisition of almost 1,000 miles worth of greenways in Nashville. So this obviously was a great opportunity for us to be involved in trail-oriented development in general. So these were things that kind of attracted us to this site. Real quickly, in terms of the project overview, 11 plus acres. Phase one that we're currently focused on would be a little bit over 2 acres at the north and west corner of St. Elmo and just blanked on the Middle Street. Sorry. So you can kind of see that it's a little bit more outlined like the footprint of the development right there in the center of your screen. Currently, we are scheduled and focused on breaking ground at the end of this year. The first phase encompasses around 30 stacked flats or condominiums. So these would be small format, 700 to 1,000 square foot condominiums with about 3,000 square feet of retail and 38 single family townhomes. At this point, and we've talked about this, we are currently under contract and have been for the last year. We're well over roughly $100,000 worth of due diligence on this site. We are working with Perimeter on the remaining 9 acres, which we have optioned, which would be at the south and west corner of Middle Street in St. Elmo. And you can kind of see that again to the left of Middle Street as it kind of connects to the Riverwalk there. The nature and mix of product for those 9 acres is still something that is somewhat fluid and also is really going to be informed, I think, by the timeliness and the decisions that are made at the city and the county level as it pertains to further capital improvements, obviously the stadium, which is under consideration currently. A little bit more about just our development model and philosophy. We focus on urban infill. And really 2 things that we feel like are important to our development model and probably important to this conversation are 2 things: diversity and density. I think it's pretty clear that when we go and look at those thriving and sustainable urban neighborhoods, what's driving that success and what's giving these neighborhoods a sense of resilience over time is diversity. And that's diversity in all aspects: diversity of housing product, diversity of demographics, diversity of job opportunities, all created in proximity to one another so that we're not completely relying on vehicular transportation, but where we're looking at proximity as opposed to mobility. So when we cluster the ability to live, work, and play all in one area, we find that the social benefits, the economic benefits, the transportation benefits all contribute again to this kind of sense of strength and sustainability going forward. The second thing I would say to that is that what drives diversity is density. All the work that we do in terms of infill is usually upzoning. It's basically taking property that is either underutilized or is not zoned in an optimal way that will allow a mix of uses, added density, and really kind of getting to that diversity kind of component that I've been speaking of. Allowing the market to create more development potential within a certain location opens up alternatives and options that gives the ability to see a mix of housing types. And I'll use an example, like right now in South Broad, by and large, what you're seeing are single family townhomes that are being created. They're the cheapest to build. There's a really clear demand for it. The permitting and inspections and code requirements are less onerous. And so you're seeing the market respond to that in delivering that product. As you begin to contemplate catalytic events such as a stadium, a new interchange, a new shopping, a grocery store, these kinds of things begin to catalyze the ability for the market to underwrite products that are more expensive and take more risk as it pertains to retail and commercial, as it pertains to multifamily small format housing product. These are all the things that urban neighborhoods need to thrive. And we've seen it over and over again. Density is not necessarily, sometimes that's seen as kind of a negative, but actually when density is taken into consideration with a master plan, its outlook is comprehensive and holistic, and it's not thinking in segments or in a segregated manner, but we're talking about transportation, we're talking about housing, we're talking about infrastructure. These are the things that I think Jim brings to the table as well in terms of his role as a master developer. And we've been talking about the value of looking at not just the 140 acres at Wheeling and US Pipe, but at South Broad as a district in a holistic way. So we feel like, again, that the stadium, this TIF district, accelerates the market's ability to provide this diversity of product type, housing type. It provides the opportunity for major permanent infrastructure to be put into place. These things, given the trajectory of Chattanooga, are probably going to happen, but the opportunity that we have right now significantly impacts the rate at which this happens and the product type that you will see in the short, mid, and kind of long term. There's constraints to South Broad. There's only so much time from our perspective that we have in order to make some of these key decisions. And so we're kind of waiting in the wings, and we're hoping that the third component of those things that we saw a year ago are going to fall into place in the way of the stadium and the TIF district. And we hope to break ground by the end of this year. And I'll leave it at that and look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you. Jermaine, before you come to the mic, we just want to recognize Commissioner Chip Baker in the audience. Thank you for coming.
And I think we also have Commissioner Steve Highlander as well.
Yes, the chairman had recognized him earlier. Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry about this.
Right.
Okay. I did want to invite Mr. McKittrick Simmons. He is the financial partner for Jim Irwin and New City Properties. Again, Mr. Irwin couldn't be here again today because of a family vacation, but I wanted Mr. Simmons to talk about some of the other projects they're working on and some of the other investment.
Great, thanks. Nice to meet you guys. It's good to be here today. Actually, our family is from Chattanooga originally. My grandparents, Fran and Mitch Simmons, lived up on the mountain for a long, long time. and my dad went to Baylor, and I grew up playing home run derby in the Commons baseball fields. So have a real affinity for Chattanooga, and very excited to get to be involved in the city in this way. I'll just give you the very, very quick background. Our company is called Sweetwater Holdings. We are basically investors and developers of real estate. There are 3 partners at Sweetwater. I started Sweetwater in 2012, so we're a little over 10 years old. The other 2 partners are a guy named Larry Gellerstadt. He was the, if you all have ever heard of Cousins Properties, which is a publicly traded REIT in Atlanta. Larry was the chairman and CEO of Cousins for many, many years. When he stepped down as CEO and chairman of Cousins, he came and joined me at Sweetwater. And then if you've ever heard of Post Properties, which is one of the largest owners and developers of multifamily apartments in the country, Dave Stockert was the CEO of Post for many, many years, probably 20 years. Larry and Dave, when they stepped down from being CEOs of those publicly traded companies, joined me. And so the 3 of us are the partners of Sweetwater. We've invested or developed a little over $4 billion of real estate since Sweetwater started. As you guys know, this last decade has been a good decade for real estate. We've been very, very active during that time. Of that $4 billion, we've sold about $2 billion of that. We still have about $2 billion of active development happening today. Investments that includes office buildings, a lot of industrial buildings, multifamily apartments, townhomes for rent, and some industrial outdoor storage. So we do it across a lot of asset classes in real estate. Of the $2 billion we have active today, Jim Irwin, who you all have met, Jim is one of my longest friends and best partners in the real estate business. Jim and I have been involved in many joint ventures over the years. We developed a part of Atlanta that's now known as the Upper West Side, actually somewhat comparable to South Broad. It was a kind of more industrial area. Jim and I partnered together and redeveloped a lot of things in that area, which was thankfully a great success. And then today, one of Jim's biggest projects is called the Fourth Atlanta. It's across the street from Ponce Market. And as of today, we're under construction with about $650 million of development. That is, if you ever get emails from MailChimp or use MailChimp, we're developing MailChimp's new headquarters. We have a residential project under construction, and we just closed the construction loan on a hotel 2 weeks ago. New City and Sweetwater are like first cousins of each other. We do a lot of business together. On the Fourth Ward project, we are the capital backing behind that project. Similar to Chattanooga, Jim is really the lead. I'm biased because Jim's a good friend of mine. I think Jim is one of the generational developers in Atlanta. I think his skill set, and if you look at what his projects are, he's an extraordinary talent. In the Fourth Ward, we're the capital backing behind that. In Chattanooga, it would be the same. We would be the capital that is backing the private development that goes on around the stadium. And something that we're very excited about. We've studied, like you all, we've studied where other stadiums have been a catalytic thing. And so we've been spending a lot of time on this project and are very excited about it. So just thought it'd be helpful for you all to know, or at least know in terms of the New City Sweetwater relationship. We work in a fund structure. And so what Sweetwater has done in recent years is we raise large funds that are discretionary, where we have the discretion of where they're invested. And so we have a large fund right now that we have raised, and that would be the source of the money that goes in to the private development. So from a capital standpoint, that's what I'd be spending a lot of my time on this. So we're very enthusiastic about the project. I personally love Chattanooga a lot, and was just glad to meet you guys and happy to answer any questions you have later. Happy to speak to any of that that's helpful. Thank you.
And at this time, and these are some of the images from Core Nashville. I think Andrew forgot to show some of these mock-ups, but that's okay. I'll do my best Andrew impersonation. So these are some of the images of some of the development that Core has planned. Is this part of phase one?
Yes.
Okay.
That is phase one.
Okay. And these are some additional images. So with that, I would also like to sort of talk about, ironically, as I said, sort of at the beginning of the presentation, part of telling a redevelopment story is also sort of talking about baseball. And so one of the people who could best do that, because of the development that he's seen in other baseball markets, is Jason Fryer, the owner of the Chattanooga Lookouts. And so with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Fryer up to take us through some slides.
Yeah, I'm just going to skip it. Thanks, Jermaine. If you give me 1 second, I'll just make sure I have the right presentation. Well, thanks for having me here today. As you know, the Lookouts have been part of the fabric of Chattanooga since 1885. But with the project we're talking about today, we're even more excited for the future and for what that could mean, not only for the team, but for the South Broad District and for the citizens of Chattanooga and Hamilton County. See if I can make this work. Oh, I turned it off. I got it. All right. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the ballpark and its role in this project. Yes, we as a baseball team would like to be in a new state-of-the-art facility and to have that for our fans. And yes, Major League Baseball is requiring that we provide a compliant facility. But I think the more important question is what this venue can do for the area and for the region. What we're talking about here, and what I'll demonstrate in a moment, is a true multi-use venue, one that will bring a large number of attendees to the site, create valuable views and a sense of place. This in turn will catalyze development. And this isn't merely theoretical. We've done this successfully before, not once, but twice with other teams we own. We've also seen it done in more than a dozen other similar cities around the country. The other thing here, as you've seen with Core and with McKittrick and Jim, is that we have top-notch developers lined up here and ready to go once this project is approved. So how do we know this venue will attract a large number of attendees and host many additional events? The short answer is we've done this before. The chart here shows you the first 11 years up through the start of COVID at our ballpark in Fort Wayne. We opened that venue in 2009. Before we moved, we were in a venue very much like AT&T Field. We were drawing about what the Lookouts draw now, somewhere in the mid 200,000s a year in terms of fans for baseball. And we weren't really doing any other events because that's not what the facility was designed for. As you can see here, since opening the new venue in Fort Wayne, we've averaged over 400,000 fans per year for the team's baseball games, plus over 126,000 fans per year for the 600 plus non-baseball events we have each year. And as you can also see here, this is not a short-term improvement. This is over the course of more than a decade. It's a durable and permanent improvement. Another thing worth noting, the Fort Wayne MSA is only about 2/3 the size of Chattanooga's. So we think we can perform even better here. And if you want to know what those 600 plus events are per year, well, with over 6,000 events since we opened that venue, it's pretty much everything you can imagine. But I'm going to quickly show you just some of these events. So it includes major concerts. This one is when we had the Zac Brown Band at our ballpark in Fort Wayne. This one is called the Fort for Fitness. It's a race that draws over 10,000 runners a year. It's grown to include a kids marathon, a senior marathon, a wheelchair marathon, and a health expo. We get over 20,000 people for this event each year, including people coming in from major cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and Cincinnati. Hotel rooms around town are full. This is a college soccer game we've hosted a couple of different times between Notre Dame and Indiana. This is something we call the Patriotic Pops. We partner with the Fort Wayne Philharmonic and offer a free concert and fireworks around Independence Day each year. This is a holiday light show. It's a recognition we do for around the holiday time, dedicated to our children who have lost a parent. Downtown Fort Wayne does a larger light parade. You can see the little schedule on the left. It winds through town. Different light displays go on. It ends at Parkview Field, where we have the largest Christmas tree in the region, and do a fireworks show. We do a New Year's Eve ball drop each year. Here's another concert. This one was Florida Georgia Line. This is Nelly performing at the venue. This one is a Scout sleepover. We do this with the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, and the Girl Scouts. We do a lot of different, just random community events while the team is out of town. This is on-field yoga. And then maybe most importantly, when there's not some sort of ticketed event in place, we keep the venue open. We don't lock the gates. It's open and serves as a public park from dawn till dusk for the community. What you see here is our splash pad, which is a big hit during the summer with the local kids. And we've done the same thing, lots of great and creative events with our ballpark in Columbia, South Carolina. Here's a breast cancer fundraiser we do at the local hospital system. This is Darius Rucker performing at our venue. Here's a high school football game. We do many of those. This was something called the Night of Joy we hosted at our ballpark. We worked with two of the largest churches in the area. One is predominantly Black and the other is predominantly white. We organized this night for all in the community to pray together. We reached out to all the churches around the area, had thousands of attendees. Here you can see the two churches' choirs performing together as part of that. This is the equivalent of the Patriotic Pops, same thing that we did in Fort Wayne. We do that in Columbia. We also host major college baseball. So in Columbia, our biggest event is what we call the Battle at Bull Street. That's the University of South Carolina and Clemson. We sell that out at well over 9,000 people. It's gotten so big that we now do a fan fest out in the plaza for the people who can't get in. We had about 3,000 people for just the fan fest this year. We also have great indoor spaces at the venue where we can do holiday parties, corporate meetings and events, Rotary Club meetings, weddings, and all sorts of things. And like Fort Wayne, Columbia hosts major concerts as well. I've showed you a lot of photos. To better understand how this works, I have a video, but I don't want to take up too much of your time today. What I'll do instead is I'll email this to, I'll have Jermaine email it to all of you. But this is about a 2-minute video that actually shows a week in the life of our venue after the season is over. It shows how we transition from all these different events. Oops, how do I, let me see. Okay, there we go. One other thing I'll mention, I showed an awful lot of different types of events from Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne is in the northeast corner of Indiana. It's cold through usually the end of April, and it starts getting cold again sometime in October. In Columbia, where we've opened the venue more recently, we're able to host a lot more outdoor events because we have a lot more of the year to do that. The same thing would be the case here in Chattanooga. And while all this activity is great in and of itself, what's even more important is the impact on development. So what I have here is a photo of the before in Fort Wayne. So this is before our project was open. You'll see sort of on the middle left, most of this was empty surface parking. In the bottom left, I wish I had a way to point it out to you, but there's a small building in the bottom left. That was a liquor store. That was the only operating business there. There were about a dozen condemned houses. You can't really see them, but they're in the center of the photo in those trees. The large two buildings on the right-hand side, I'll talk about in a minute. That was formerly a large facility for General Electric. That had been abandoned, and the entire south side of Fort Wayne had suffered, much like the South Broad District has here. Following the ballpark being built, those buildings, I'll show you in a few minutes, are being repurposed. About half that project is done, and the other half is ongoing. By itself, those two buildings, it's about 3.6 million square feet, and it's about $500 million of private investment. This is what that formerly empty area looks like now. You can see the ballpark. There's a mixed-use building in left field, which is retail on the ground floor, office above that, and residential above that. The building is so close to the ballpark that the residents in the apartments have actually caught home runs on their porches. In center field, you can see two hotels. On the left-hand side, you can see the roof of a significant multifamily project. There's also a high-rise residential project. I don't know how to point it out to you, but it's sort of on the upper left-hand corner. And to the right of that is a brand new office building. It's about a block north of the stadium. Here's the same thing from another angle. You can see the residential a little bit on the left-hand side there. And this is just a zoom in so you can see the left field building and the hotels a little bit better. One thing worth noting, 3 significant companies have moved their headquarters to downtown Fort Wayne since the ballpark opened. One of the new towers, it's If you see the light post in left field, it's the building that's sort of obscured by the light post. It's immediately beyond that. But that is a brand new tower that was built by Ash Brokerage, a large wholesale insurance brokerage. They moved 300 employees to downtown Fort Wayne. There's an old department store that's actually between that building and the ballpark that was renovated into the new headquarters for Shindigs, which is one of the largest party supply companies in the country. And the Electric Works project, which are those old General Electric buildings I was pointing out to you earlier, that has attracted the headquarters of a company called Do It Best. Do It Best is a $5 billion plus hardware and building materials cooperative. It is the most valuable company in the state of it, most valuable private company in the state of Indiana. So all three of those are now headquartered within a block and a half of the ballpark. There was nothing like that before. What I have here is a map of all the new downtown development that has occurred since the ballpark opened. This map was put together by the Regional Economic Development Group. There has been $1.2 billion in development around the ballpark. As you can see, we've redeveloped almost the entirety of downtown Fort Wayne since the ballpark opened. The other thing is this map is from 2020, so it's actually missing a few things that have started since then. Projects are going strong there. This will show you just a few of what those projects are. The one on the bottom right is that Electric Works project where I was telling you Do It Best, just moving their headquarters. And while Fort Wayne is further along, because that ballpark opened 7 years before Columbia's, we're seeing exactly the same thing, only faster in Columbia. This is the site plan showing all the development that has taken place and is taking place around our ballpark in Columbia. This image also is about a year old, so it doesn't have all the projects currently underway. Our site in Columbia was very similar to what we're looking at with the Foundry site here. It was large, over 180 acres. It was the former state mental health campus, and it had opened just after the Civil War, but was shut down around the turn of this century. The buildings were in a state of disrepair. All roads and utilities had deteriorated. The city and the state had made several attempts to bring in developers, but had no luck without a catalyst project. We partnered with the City of Columbia and a master developer to build a new venue to kickstart development on the site. That ballpark opened in 2016. After nearly 2 decades of inactivity, in just 6 years, we have $650 million plus of development there, either finished or underway on the site. And the project is only about a third of the way complete. Far more is on the way, including another major project, over $100 million, that just went under contract and will be announced within the next 2 months. This is a view of the ballpark in Columbia and a small part of what's being developed. In this image, you can see 2 new Class A office buildings. There's one attached to the ballpark, which is in the front left. There's another new office building being built in the top center. In between them, there's a big multifamily project that I'll show you in a moment. This photo is about 4 months old, so you'll see how much that's progressed since then. To the right, you see a parking deck. To the north of that, there's an REI superstore, and there's a space in between there where a hotel is going to be built. This is the other side of that building that's attached to the ballpark. This is the street side. This office space is 100% occupied. And what's important here is the building and its relationship to the ballpark and the overall development helped draw a very significant new business to town. Capgemini, which is a $13 billion Paris-based consulting firm, chose Columbia, South Carolina, and this site for a cyber defense center. They were not anywhere in the area before, but viewed this project as something that could help them attract the talent they need. They now have over 500 high-paying jobs in this building. This is the other office building I mentioned before. It started once the first one filled up. It is in the final phase of being built. Tenants actually start moving in August. It's built using a new environmentally friendly method that substitutes something called cross-laminated timber for steel. It's the first of its kind in South Carolina. This will show you the further project on the very large multifamily project right across the street from the ballpark. This is 270 units of residential, over 50,000 square feet of retail. In the foreground, you can see one of the historic buildings we're saving as part of our redevelopment there. This is one of 9 historic buildings that we're restoring and reusing as part of this project. This one is actually the largest of the 9 historic buildings we're saving. As you can see, it's right beyond right field in the ballpark. This is called the Babcock Building. It was the primary building for the asylum. This is a before photo. I don't think you can really see here, but in this photo, there's not a single window intact in the building. The building was in such bad shape. The first time I went to tour it, we had to leave and call animal control because there was a pack of wild dogs living in this building. Right now, it's in the latter stages of renovation and we'll have over 200 apartments. The first phase of that is actually already open. Our director of marketing for our team in Columbia is actually one of the initial tenants. She now walks to work. The remaining phases, this building will be entirely open within the next 6 months. Another thing that's worth noting is what we have seen in Fort Wayne and Columbia is not unique. There are many other cities that have had success with similar projects. You know, Fort Wayne is now in its 13th year. We've won many awards. You can see the thing on the right. I don't know how visible it is, but 7 times in that 13 years, Fort Wayne has been named the #1 minor league ballpark in the country at any level. Because of this and because of all the development that has happened, it's really become a model project. We've had 20 plus cities that have come to Fort Wayne to visit our project to see how we made it work. And there are some cities that, you know, go back and are telling their media they're explicitly basing their own development on what we've done in Fort Wayne. You can see a few of those here. Cities that have identified Fort Wayne as their model include extremely successful projects in places like Birmingham and Amarillo, and even the project that is now getting started in Knoxville. Columbia, while more recent, was named Ballpark of the Decade for the 2010s, and it's starting to be copied. 2 projects that are explicitly trying to mimic what Columbia did are the one that opened just last year in Madison, which is north of Huntsville, and one in Kannapolis, North Carolina. I appreciate you all taking the time to speak with me today. I know that these projects are complex. I know they can be politically difficult. They never go without significant opposition, and they're hard to explain to the public in advance. But our experience on this has been completely consistent. While it takes leadership to make these projects happen on the back end, everyone realizes that moving forward was the right decision. I'm going to play you a quick clip from the mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, talking about that. Whoop. Can anybody help me with
very visionary citizens who stood up and said, yes, this is a good investment for our community, and they stood by it. And now, where you said about 80% of the people were originally opposed to it, or close to 80%, now I would venture to say 99% of the people are in favor. I've had so many citizens come up and say to me, Mayor, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And thank you for building this.
And for those of you, I know that a couple of you were able to make the trip to Columbia, and you heard almost the identical story from Mayor Steve Benjamin there. Another thing that we've noticed is, there we go. It's not just the supporters that feel this way after the fact. We see even the staunchest opponents come around. What I'm going to show you in a second is a news report from 2014. The person being interviewed on camera is City Councilman Tom Smith. Back when our project was first being debated, Councilman Smith was, I think he would tell you, the lead opponent of the project. He went so far as to say, I hope facetiously, that he thought it'd be better for Fort Wayne to build the world's largest Cracker Barrel than to do the ballpark project. But this is what Councilman Smith had to say 5 years after the ballpark opened.
We got 1, we got 2, we got 3.
Opposition turned into opportunity.
It's making a difference. I mean, this is a magnet. It's a real attraction.
The Ballpark Hotel and Apartments, all once known as the Harrison Square Project.
A lot of animosity.
In 2007, there was not a lot of public support. People didn't think a baseball field would work downtown. They didn't think anything was wrong with the old Wizards Stadium by the Coliseum. They didn't think tens of millions of public tax dollars should be spent on a minor league team. City Council still approved the project, but the vote was 6-3.
I voted no because my constituents wanted me to vote no.
That was misunderstood by many in the community as just a ballpark. It was never just a ballpark. It was about bringing people downtown, bringing more money into our community from convention and tourism.
5 years after Parkview Field opened, it's working.
I would have never thought that catalytic effect of Parkview Field and Harrison Square would impact this quickly. It has been a great success.
So this whole complex.
At that point, when Councilman Smith was speaking, we had only about 200 million of development to support the ballpark. As I said before, today we're more than 5 times that, right about 1.2 billion. So the case for it's even stronger. And we look forward to working with you to convert the skeptics here in Chattanooga as well. Thanks.
All right, that concludes our presentation. Chairwoman Coonrod, so with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you. Chairman Lutford.
Oh, good. We've only got about an hour, 15 minutes, so that'll take my questions. So a quick story. I'm a small business owner here in Chattanooga, have been for 25 years. Anytime I have invested into my company or believed in it, I've had some sort of risk management in mind. So where I'm going to go with this question is probably for Brent or Jermaine right now. That is the break even. I'm hearing from Core, Andrew, right? Core, you're committed. You're in for $170 million, which is roughly half, if I'm correct, of the $350 million we need to be out of our debt service. Is that correct, Brent?
Yes.
And that's already, I mean, you're shaking your head as yes, committed to that, but you're coming.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I will say that 11 plus acres we have under control and are working with Perimeter on. Phase 1 is like getting close to being fully baked. I would say the balance of the land, we're really waiting to see what happens right now. If this doesn't move forward, we would need to pause and kind of reconsider like what our future is. But we're here and we're ready to go. But this conversation does have an impact. But like I've said, we're a year in. We're over $100,000 kind of invested right now. We're real. And feel like, before the end of the year, we should be breaking ground.
And that was the other part that really, honestly, that struck me. You're shovel ready. Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, a few months away feels like it's shovel ready to me.
Yes. So we have schematic plans completed. We do not have permits in hand. All of that is in process right now. Brownfield agreement is agreed upon. So yes, we're well on our way. I wouldn't say we're shovel ready with permits in hand, but all of that is in process. with
Fair
the
enough. Yeah,
consultants.
fair enough. Understanding the zoning process and
Yeah,
permitting,
yeah.
I can definitely. Mr. Simmons, it sounded to me like your group is just waiting. Is that, I mean, your resources, and I see Jermaine getting up, so he looks a little nervous, but it sounds like your group is ready to go.
Well, let me just say, he's the least person that I'm nervous about. So, Mr. Simmons, you want to come up? Sure.
Yeah, if you don't mind, for the record, so that we get it recorded. And then, Brent, I want you to follow up on the 350 million break even, because I feel like for me, that's a really big, like I say, when in my small business, I can't make a decision until I have something to quantify it. And I go into it with some sort of confidence. And I feel like that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. The short answer is that's correct. Our capital is committed and at our discretion now. And given that this will be the 9th deal we've done with Jim Irwin, it's not like it's a de novo relationship with him. And as we've studied what happens when these stadiums, as Jason just saw, we just know that as soon as the stadium breaks ground, you are going to want to break ground on the kind of phase 1 around it. And so we have the highest confidence that about that project and our ability to fund it because we have that money committed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking these questions is because it's, no offense to Mr. Fryer, this really isn't about the stadium.
Right.
When I'm analyzing this really is not about the stadium. Yes, it's an important part of it, but I'm really looking at where the energy is around this and building the confidence. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yes.
Can anyone talk to me about what or the impacts on the Riverwalk coming through the property or no one's mentioned yet, hopefully some sort of positive impact to the Chattanooga Creek? Yeah, do you want to talk about the break even? Yeah, I do want to hear about that. Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me because I've been running a lot of numbers and I appreciate the answers here.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great point. We really think we're going to get to 500 million fairly quickly. We could come in with those amounts and it would look great, but I have to steward taxpayer dollars. I am a licensed CPA. I have standards to uphold. So I wanted to look at it as, what exactly do we have to have for this to work and for it to work well for the whole community, for the city, for the county. 350 million, I feel really confident about that number. One, because of what CORE is already committed to. Two, having a master developer for the site is a game changer as opposed to not having a master developer. The Lookouts ownership group, they have a lot of, obviously from what Jason has shown, they have a lot of experience doing this sort of thing. It's not just about the stadium. It's really about the development, and half the presentation was about the development around the stadium, right? So all of those things, I'm very confident that we will reach 350 million development, but the development's not the only thing. We will have a contractual obligation with Hardball Capital to pay a portion of the lease payment, the taxable bond portion, not lease payment, bond payment. The lease will pay the debt service on the taxable bond. We believe baseball will happen if we have a stadium. Again, there's only not been minor league baseball once in 120 years. So we will generate sales taxes. We will generate parking revenues, all those things. So as you start eliminating the things that are riskier than others, your risk starts minimizing very quickly. If CORE comes online at 170 million, which we believe they will, and they're committed to do, that's half of the increment that we need to get where we need to be. So for us, 350 million that's the break-even point. I mean, the city and county have to put money in regardless in fiscal year 25 because there is a portion of a debt, bond payment due. Increment will not be on the tax rolls at that point. It comes the following year. So, we will definitely have to pay that, whatever, I think I showed you 840,000 a piece that year and probably some small amount the year after that. But once you hit 350 million, we're done. We don't have to pay any more in. Once you start going past 350, that's when the project actually starts throwing additional increment off that can be used for the Alton Park connector. It can be used for roads. It can be used for other infrastructure. It can be used for parks, public space, all those sorts of things. So while we do believe it's going to be, we think it's going to get up to $1 billion, just like Fort Wayne. We're a bigger city than Fort Wayne. The site is conducive for that. We are being as conservative as possible in what we project to repay the debt that will be issued to build the stadium.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair, I have one more question, then
Okay.
I'll be quiet, I promise.
Did you want
Diversity of
Andy to-
how, yeah,
to
I
talk
do.
about
Yeah, I
the
did want to
creek?
talk a little bit about the public amenity part of the overall project, because I feel like that's a big part of this conversation that we're
Yes.
missing, and that is improvements to the area, obviously. But I do want you to touch a little bit more on the diversity of housing, because I think that's a huge conversation point that we need, and this council takes very seriously. But the overarching feel of it being a park that everyone's welcome to. If I feel like if tax increment financing is going to be used, and sometimes we don't have access to that, but this one seems to have the possibility of a lot of public access. And I think that's an important part of this conversation. If anyone can allude to some of that, and I know I talked specifically on the Chattanooga Creek. I don't know, but
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question. So I think and Jason can shed more light on this, but in the way the stadium is built, it can become much more publicly accessible. And so in the examples that you showed in the examples that Jason showed in Fort Wayne and Columbia, you do have a very public facing accessible park that is much easier just physically to access. But then also because of the way that it's built sort of down into the ground so that you can be sort of a pedestrian walking by and you can walk up to the fence and sort of be eye level looking down on the field, and you could actually sort of watch a game without even paying for a ticket. Not that Jason would want you to do that, but I mean, just in the way that the construction is and the way that the layout is, it becomes much more of a public asset. But having said that, to your other question though about the Riverwalk and the Chattanooga Creek, I'll ask Andy to come up to talk a little bit about that and sort of about what they imagine in terms of seeing creek activation. But that is one of the reasons that we as an administration feel very, very strongly about the project, is because you do have this entire stretch of the Riverwalk that is a marvelous asset for the community. And so bringing more people to it seems like the right thing to do. And then, in addition to that, our ability to be able to connect the Alton Park connector to that marvelous stretch of the Riverwalk, and then to create better connectivity to the Alton Park community is really something that makes us happy and something that is aspirational for the administration. But Andy, you want to talk about the creek a little bit and housing?
Well, maybe just to begin with, as it pertains to the creek, I'd mentioned in my first presentation just our attraction to the Riverwalk, which, coming from Nashville, is just a spectacular accomplishment in the city of Chattanooga in terms of its forward thinking and collaboration with the community perimeter in this case. And the fact that the Riverwalk weaves through the site and is already there, maybe some people would see that as kind of a constraint. We saw it as an opportunity to be able to take what's basically a clean palette and then to respond to the Riverwalk, which is unbelievably activated, even in this particular stretch, through the U.S. Pipe site and Wheeling site. Is just so exciting for us. So as it pertains to the property that we have right there at the trailhead, and Jermaine was kind of talking about it, it's a little bit of a nexus in terms of the way in which phase 2, phase 3, kind of come and transition right there at the trailhead. And then you've got Alton Creek that just dies right into St. Elmo, basically at the property line of the property that we're looking at with perimeter. So we see that as a huge opportunity, and we think designing to the Riverwalk is a huge opportunity for success in terms of animating that space, bringing usership, and honestly, it's a huge, huge amenity that we find for those people who are choosing neighborhoods and places to live, is to have those kinds of outdoor opportunities. The creek is something that we've been having preliminary conversations on. We know that Chattanooga Creek has the potential to be cleaned up. It has the potential to be accessible. We know that there are already people in the community that are currently doing cleanups on a regular basis. Is it Wild Trails is the organization? And I met with the executive director there. Troy Keith knows that we would love to see the trailhead become a point of access to the creek in the context of a cleanup. Paddling is one of the fastest growing outdoor recreation activities in the country. You're starting to see paddle parks and all of these kinds of things. And now you're seeing not just greenways become a key component of outdoor active kind of park programming, but blueways. And then Chickamauga Creek is a great example again in Chattanooga. When the community, the private sector, and the government get together, what can happen in terms of animating and activating these creeks. So we're completely on board with that.
Diversity of housing.
Okay. Can you just restate your question and I'll.
So the importance, this council has been, and the mayor's objectives have been a focus on affordable housing, but also diversity of housing. And I think you touched on it earlier, but I'm very interested to hear more on the commitment to a diversity of housing and how that works in your model.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, my first response is this is just what we do, because diversity is not just something that is in the best interest of the community, but we think it makes our projects more marketable. It de-risks, a lot of times moving into these neighborhoods where you don't have a huge comp set for certain product types. So instead of going in and building 60 townhomes, we're going to build 28 flats and 38 townhomes. So it kind of de-risks our project to a degree. It's more expensive to do that within a certain project. And there is a little bit of, risk involved in that. Your smaller format housing types, the condos, we call them stacked flats. Some people may call them apartments, maybe that you can sell. But your 750 square foot, 1 bedroom, or your 600 square foot studio. In a place like South Broad, where you have townhomes that are right now selling for over $500,000, and maybe you see a smaller townhome that's coming in at, I don't know, $390. What we're able to do when you come in and build condos is you start introducing product out there at like the low twos. And then for a 1 bedroom, and maybe you go up to a 2 bedroom that's in your high twos. So it's not like the silver bullet for all of the affordable housing needs in the world, but it is a market-based model that broadens basically your buyer profile and allows for those members of a community, whether you're a firefighter or whether you're a window washer, whatever it is, to have the availability to buy into a market that's trending and merging, and to build equity and all of those kinds of things. So it's harder to accomplish. It costs more to do that. But for us to see the city move forward and to see collaboration with the private market and the nonprofit sector, to think about high density, mixed use, big profile, catalytic kind of infrastructure projects that will accelerate the market's ability to diversify what it brings to the market. So,
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I really appreciate the presentations and the supplementary information that we have had over the last week. Brent Goldberg has earned my trust over the last 4 years, and I appreciate the specificity of the information he's provided to us. Consequently, I am feeling very comfortable with the numbers related to financing the stadium. And I agree 100% that for me and for the people of District 2, this is not about baseball. This is about opportunity. And that's a really, really exciting thing. But there are two things I hear regularly when I talk to folks in District 6 when it comes to growth, in as much as we want it. People say, we don't want to be like Atlanta because they hate the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to be like Nashville because there's nowhere to live if you don't make a ton of money.
Sure.
Okay. So I'd like to chat with Core a little bit about that, because we have an opportunity to do something better than what you've done in Nashville. So can we talk for a minute, please?
Yes.
So would you please, Andrew, share with me, given the fact that you've done numerous projects in Nashville and been a large part of the renaissance of Nashville, what have you learned from project to project, and how are you actually now, if you have, accomplishing true mixed income neighborhoods in your projects?
Well, every project's different. Every neighborhood's different. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is that the most success in terms of making impact is when the government, regulatory sector, the nonprofit sector, and the market come together, identify what tools are available, determine which tools are most applicable to any one situation, any one neighborhood, any one project or product type, and that there's a commitment at that level to begin to execute. So we're not low-income housing developers. We're not affordable housing developers. There are affordable housing development corporations out there. There are low-income development companies that are out there that need to be at the table, that have the experience and the expertise. I can say, though, as a market-based developer, that there are incentives in Nashville. We're doing a 360-unit project in Madison, which is not technically Nashville, but just outside of Nashville. We're partnering with Amazon's Housing Equity Fund, which is a low interest rate kind of loan product that they're using to address issues of attainable housing. And we're also working with Metro's in the mayor's office pilot program, which is a payment in lieu of tax, kind of a tax abatement tool. These are like tools that are really easy to attach to kind of our economic model and the way in which we execute projects. We're in the process of that, and we're having really good discussions, and we're super optimistic about how that'll play out. In summary, what I've learned is it takes all the various stakeholders that have an interest in the issues. You have to get really specific about the issue that you want to address, and then you bring all the best minds to the table to identify how to address it. We have a role in that, but we only have so much influence in terms of how we do and what we do. But we like to think that we're collaborative. We're excited about what the mayor has kind of announced in terms of the housing fund and the commitment to creating a chief housing officer. And we would love to be a part of those conversations and add to that conversation as much as we can, and even use the relationships that we do have, in the nonprofit sector, to help the city think through how do we address all facets of the affordability problem. And the last thing I'd say too, that I think we haven't done everything perfectly, obviously, in Nashville, and we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. But one of the things that we've found is helpful is thinking about issues of affordable living and not just being pigeonholed into thinking about housing. Because oftentimes, if you look at it in a very singular way and just think about housing, you open yourself up to kind of unintended consequences about putting that housing in the wrong place. For instance, where transportation is not accounted for and somebody gets affordable living, but they have expensive transportation, realities. And then the affordable housing kind of goes out the door. So it kind of goes back to that kind of comprehensive view. How do we create these active, vibrant, mixed income, mixed use environments where proximity takes precedence over mobility, and where all actors in the community have the ability and the opportunity to participate and live? And we feel like we do a really good job in a segment, of those needs, but we would not espouse ourselves to being able to solve the needs of everybody in that spectrum in terms of the community. So I don't know if that's starting to address your question, but
Thank you. That's fine. Yeah. Jermaine and Joda. So this is kind of my second theme, and then I'll be finished. The word generational has been used in this room. Mr. Chazen was quoted in the paper talking about generational commitment and I think you were quoted as that, or your legacy. Excuse me if I put words into your mouth. This is a huge opportunity. This space and the Bend is a huge opportunity. This body has clearly has a role in that. My concerns are the unintended consequences, and I don't think that we can look to the development partners in the room to be a leader in the conversation about how we do it better. And how we protect our people. You know, something that people talk about on the regular in this room is making sure Chattanooga is a place for the people who live here, not just the people who visit here. Making sure that if you work in Chattanooga, you can afford to be part of Chattanooga. There are towns like Charlotte, North Carolina, where nobody's from Charlotte. Everybody moved to Charlotte, but the people that built Charlotte are on the outskirts because they can't really afford to be a part of it. So we have an urgency recommended to us to approve a project to break ground because of a schedule related to a sport that is, for whatever reason, subsidized by the government. I was thinking we'd go all the way back to Rome. That was probably a government project, the Coliseum. So I get it. This is what we do with sports. There's an urgency there. But if folks are talking about breaking ground on these other projects, we've got to get our zoning, our impact fees, our plans for public space, our thoughts about how we are going to handle property tax credits for people who are going to be could potentially be immediately impacted in a negative way, who live in ring neighborhoods of this. We got to get way ahead of this. If you all want us to be voting on this and giving folks the go ahead to move forward on some big generational impact projects, we got to be ready to do our part in a big way. Or otherwise, the North Shore is going to get cannibalized. I feel it coming. Fraser Avenue is going to hurt if we're talking about pops in the stadium and on and on. We got to protect the neighborhoods we have and make sure that the people that live here that have made Chattanooga a great place to live get to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Councilwoman, or Madam Chair. Jermaine,
Yes.
we've talked a lot about the cost of keeping the lookouts in Chattanooga. Have we done any kind of economic impact study on what it would cost us if they left Chattanooga? I see Charles is in the room today.
Yes.
What is the economic impact? I mean, when we make a decision, we need to look at all angles of this. If we don't do the stadium, they leave. What happens?
Sure. So, and I'll ask Charles to come up here in just a second. If you look at the CSL study estimated that the Lookouts team with the new stadium had an economic impact of a little over $300 million. $300 million. If you extrapolate that and just say that, hey, the current Lookouts team without a stadium has 1/10 of that value. That's $30 million. I think that's probably a conservative estimate, but we don't have a specific study that says this is what the Lookouts this is what the Lookouts would cost if they were to leave the market. Again, though, I think for us, our big focus is what is the opportunity cost if we are not able to marshal the resources to pull together all of the development opportunities that we have for a site that has been an eyesore and blighted for over a decade. And so for us, there is a tremendous opportunity cost. Mr. Simmons and New City Properties, they have money waiting in the wings. That money will not always be waiting in the wings. Mr. Beard and Core Nashville, they have other opportunities to do development elsewhere. And so there is a tremendous opportunity cost that comes along with potentially the economic loss of losing the Lookouts. But this is not, as I've said before, and as the mayor would say, this is a development story. It's not a baseball story. The baseball is just a catalyst to get to the development.
Well, I
Um,
think I think
sure.
it's both, and we got to look at all of it. I mean, I didn't know if it had any bearing on our bond rating. I mean, I don't know if they look at, what amenities a city offers in considering bond ratings and all that. I mean, I think we have to look at all angles of this.
Sure. Let me
I
let
see
Brent
Brent
answer that
standing
part.
up, but-
Yeah.
Just briefly, when we do ratings calls with ratings agencies, they obviously look at our financial strength, right? That's the biggest part is the financial strength of the city. What's our fund balance, our policies, all those things. But the second largest part is the economic activity happening in the community. So we have to provide them with tons of information that we get from the chamber. We provide them with news stories about economic activity, about development. The more amenities we have, like a large stadium or any other amenity that brings people to Chattanooga from outside of Chattanooga, it is a big plus for us from a ratings perspective. So I don't know how many tickets we sell outside of Chattanooga, but let's say it's 20% of all the tickets are people that live in North Georgia or North Alabama. That's people that come in, they drop money here, and then they leave. So they're not using our infrastructure and everything else for more than that amount of time. Those are all positives from a bond rating perspective.
Okay. While you're standing there, is the 21st Century bonds, revenue bonds? Never mind. You can get back with me later.
Yeah.
You said- Maybe you don't know.
I don't
Let-
believe so. I think they're all general
I've got a
obligation.
couple more questions, Madam Chair. Are you still good right now?
They're,
So I got two important questions.
they're all general obligation bonds. I just had to think for a second.
21st Century General. Okay. Jermaine? I guess it's for Jermaine.
Yes, sir.
So as an investor, investors are all versed in the, in the risk reward understanding of the greater the risk, the greater the reward. And I think in this case, the taxpayers are the investors in this. So what I'm mainly interested in is reducing the risk as much as possible. We've talked a lot about, we've got a verbal commitment for $170 million worth of for investment. I would like to see an MOU stating we're bringing $170 million worth of investment so that we know we have that in the bank. I mean, that's pretty good collateral, I think, to take to the people to understand we've got a written either contractual agreement or an MOU for $170 million worth of investment. The second thing is I'd like to see an MOU in Brent's email that he gave us. What if MLB drops the lookouts? And he mentions some language that was negotiated between the MLB and the Tennessee Smokies in Knoxville. I'd like to see an MOU to the same agreement that Hardball would provide a baseball team in Chattanooga for the length of the bond. I think those, to me, that would give some level of comfort and reduce some of our risk that we have a written agreement, not just what we're sitting here talking about today. And that kind of brings me to process now. At
Yes.
what point in the process would that occur? I know our first vote is just basically sending it to the IDB to do a economic development study. But then it comes back to us for the TIF. Is that the point that we would have these agreements, these MOUs in place?
Yes, that would be my goal. That means we've got to start working right now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Dotley.
Yes, since this is in District 7, I always want to show my support for this. I want to show my support for this project. In my opinion, this is the type of economic catalyst we need for the area to keep the city going in a positive direction. The long-term impact, not only at the stadium or the Will and Foundry site, but for the surrounding communities is going to be a great impact, from finishing the Austin Park Connector to creating some sustainable growth in those neighborhoods. I believe Councilwoman Hill mentioned, getting ahead of this. And that is what we have already started doing with some community members. It's saying, we know this is coming. What do we need to do to make sure that this type of development is not just for new people moving in, but how can we make sure that it is for those who are currently there, and how can we maintain these neighborhoods? So we've already started that work. The surrounding neighborhoods are, for the most part, excited about it. They're already, I went to several neighborhood meetings in the last 2 weeks, and they are prepared to start working on, what will our neighborhood look like with this type of development. When we think about, billions of dollars coming into the area and bleeding out into areas like Southside Gardens and, of course, Alton Park, East Lake, St. Elmo, that's going to be big for them, because a lot of times these are underinvested communities, and the Mountain View community. So they're prepared for this type of investment, or they're getting prepared for this type of investment as we create our community advisory group to say, okay, do we need to talk about tax freezes? Do we need to talk about what does economic development look like on West 38th Street or the Rossville corridor or in Hooterville or Southside Gardens? So I'm a strong proponent for this, because I know long term, when you think about these neighborhoods currently, I mean, there are communities that have blocks and blocks of nothing, like no housing, no anything. But to be able to bring in some housing types based on what the community recommends and saying, we want to build this type of house, we want this housing type, or I believe the wording was attainable housing for various incomes. So I'm excited about this project. I'm excited for the community input. And to me, this is a great space for economic development meets the community. And we're going to see that in a positive way, I believe, long term, because because the community is going to say, this is what we want to see as this project continues to develop. So I wanted to make sure I made that statement on behalf of my constituents, because I know that they are in the majority, because you're never going to please everybody. But the majority of them are in support of this. They, just a comment on behalf of District 7.
And we are still very much committed to having those meetings with the community advisory group, just as we committed to when we first started meeting with them. Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody, for being here today for this discussion. I know many of you took time out of your day to come down, and I know it's a big project for you, but I still appreciate it. Mr. Beard, thank you and your company and all your partners for even looking at our community for the development, but more so for the comments you made about why. We feel a certain way about our community, and it's always great to hear other people wanting to invest in our community because of what we have, and to be a partner in it, not to change it, but to appreciate what's already here and build upon that. So I truly do appreciate that in the way that you're thinking about investment down here. And then Mr. Fryer, thank you for your presentation as far as what you envision that it could be. I think a lot of those questions have been out there. People think of a ballpark. It's hard to just think of a ballpark. But everything that was around that was really amazing. And I do appreciate it. You might want to add gladiators to your next slide for potential events for the location. Mr. Simmons, Mr. Irwin's on a family vacation. It looks to me like you have a different idea of a family vacation down here with us this evening. So appreciate the dedication and thank you for hanging out and coming down to this. So I appreciate that as well. So lots of questions seemingly around why we should do it or the benefits thereof. I think those are pretty easy to answer just from what we have seen so far and what it could potentially be. The crux of it, however, that we're hearing from our community and frankly, a lot of the critics out there aren't that a ball stadium is a bad idea or $1 billion worth of investment is a bad idea. It is whether or not the city and county should be strapped to basically ensure the bond on the stadium. I've had this conversation, Jermaine, with you. I've had it with Brent. But one more time, Brent, you've answered the email a few times. The reason that having municipal bonds backing this project make it a better project than a private investor coming in and saying, wow, you just showed me all these beautiful slides, all this amazing development that's coming. I want to build the stadium. I want to invest in building the stadium instead of having bonds, and what I hear is the taxpayers strapped with the responsibility of the debt. Can you speak to that? Again, I know we've done it before, but that's what we're having this conversation about. A response to that, Brent, is what?
First, I would say, so these are Sports Authority revenue bonds, right? Secured by the identified revenue sources. The city and the county are agreeing to be a backstop in case all those things don't happen, right? But, and we'll do that through interlocal agreement, which will be presented to you all with all the other things. But the reason that's important is because the weight of the city and the county will get us as low of an interest rate as you can possibly get in the country, right? We both have AAA ratings. We can get the best bond structure for the Sports Authority because we're going to say we'll be a backstop if the world ends. We don't think that's going to happen, but it's the prudent thing to do. The reason this needs to be a public-private partnership is to make the economics of it work. If a private developer went to build a stadium, they would have to get a loan for $80 million. The interest rate's going to be twice as much. They're going to have to pay taxes on the land. They're going to have to pay all these other costs that we don't have to pay as a government entity. And that's why the public-private partnership model works in a project like this. I mean, I think some of these gentlemen have told me if they could issue a TIF, they would do it tomorrow, right? It's a great deal. I mean, but they don't have that luxury. Only governments can do a TIF. So we have the ability to do the tax increment financing. We have the ability to borrow at really low interest rates. And we have a really good history of financial stewardship to back all that up. So that, only covers a small part of the project. We still have private money coming in to pay for 22% of the stadium. We have private money coming in to pay for maintenance of the stadium for 30 years, which is going to be at least $45 million. So overall, I think the public investment is very small. When you compare it to the private investment that's coming in, the property taxes that are going to be paid from the incremental property, yes, that's going, that becomes public money when they start paying those taxes. But by keeping it within the TIF project, that allows us to go faster, pay off the bond sooner. We will be able to look at refinancing these over 10 years. The reason we're doing 30-year bonds is because it's the most prudent thing to do right now. Until we do get to that 10-year mark and we see how much development we have, then we can refinance, get rid of those bonds sooner. So all those things combined, I think, is what makes it more prudent for this to be a public-private partnership. And this site is what tax increment financing was designed for. I mean, it really was designed for this type of site that's been, long-standing brownfield with no development for a very long time. But I also think that this kind of project is exactly what public-private partnerships is all about. I mean, it's a public investment, something that we will continue to own forever, along with all the things that the core guys talked about, live, work, play together. I mean, this is an opportunity to really create something special for what I consider to be a really small investment from the city and the county.
So Brent, two things that you mentioned had to do with the interest rate. That's kind of a given, but thank you for saying it. Also, taxes on the land, another big one. Is the third item the ability for us to use sales taxes to also pay back?
Yes, absolutely. That's critical. And if it's a privately owned stadium, we cannot recapture any of the sales taxes generated within the stadium. Thank you for reminding me. I don't know how I left that out. But yes, the state law only allows that to work for municipally owned stadiums. So it has to be a public stadium for us to be able to recapture all of the sales tax revenue. From what I showed you earlier, that sales tax revenue pays for 14% of the stadium, which is significant. If the Lookouts or anyone else owned the stadium, they would lose out on that, and it would create a huge hole in the financing of the stadium.
Okay, thank you. Those were the three items I wanted to make sure that we pointed out as to the differences and why it would make sense for it to be a public-private or why it is being proposed that way. So thank you, Brent.
Yeah, thank you.
Last, the only other item on here that we also hear about has to do with the fear of losing the Lookouts, not before or if we don't do it, but after we do it. After the investment, Chairman Henderson, I can't get that out of my head. It's 2 2 years, 2 years is 2 long years, very long years. Councilman Henderson, alluded to the MOU. I hadn't even gotten quite that far in thought process. I know we've asked the question multiple times. I know I have, as to what kind of guarantees we have, considering just in the last, year or so, we've had conversations about, MLB may, cancel the lookouts or cancel some of the minor leagues. So I'm going to wait to get an answer on Councilman Henderson's question on the MOU. I think that is a brilliant way to look at it. I don't know how realistic it is, but I love the sound of it, because those are the two things that most of the people that I talk to, and some incredibly aggressive people, I might say, usually from District 2, are concerned about the bond and about what ifs with the lookouts leaving, or whatever minor league it may be for that matter, leaving after the stadium's built and then not being able to provide any of the taxes to pay it, the leases to pay it, and those issues. Those are the big ones that I'm hearing about. So having good answers to those, one, I feel like I have, the other one, I don't.
I can ask Jason to come up. He can speak to that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is, in terms of we're happy to do an MOU, but usually what happens is, our commitment will be in a contractually binding contract, the lease. So in the lease, we will commit to signing a 30-year lease and paying the rent for 30 years and all of that. The question about Major League Baseball, the contraction issue is about one thing. It's about facilities. Minor League Baseball has been in place since 1901. So what's that, 121 years? In 121 years, there's been no team with a compliant facility that has ever been contracted. So, I think we have a pretty solid track record there. I mean, the whole reason that we were given the opportunity to stay in minor league baseball despite the facilities issues was because Major League Baseball loves being here in Chattanooga. The Reds love being here in Chattanooga. I'm happy to send you a link to the vice president of the Reds was on ESPN Chattanooga last week talking about this, saying, hey, this is where we want to be forever. We just need to work to solve this facilities issue. Short answer is we'll contractually commit to the 30 years. And we feel very confident that, with this facility, a team will be here, what would we say, since 1885, we'll be here for the next 100+ years.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fryer. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Burrs.
Actually, my colleagues have done a great job of answering some of my concerns, particularly the MOUs. So I believe I heard you say, Mr. Fryer, and I don't think anyone here is a skeptic, as you said. I think we're trying to be good stewards for the whole city. So don't take these as negatives. They take them as intelligent people asking intelligent questions. So Jermaine, I think that the MOUs to me are very important.
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that occurs to me is there are things that can happen that can obviate contracts. I just want to make sure that at least we're as assured as we can be for it. Our lawyers, I'm sure, will be looking over that to make sure that's true. The other thing I had, and my colleagues have picked up on it from CORE, Andrew, one of the things out of your mouth at the very beginning was gentrification. And there was a word you used, and it's one we've been looking at. And you gave a great, what I liked was your really straight up explanation about, no, we're not all things to all people, and what you didn't do. And your explanation was outstanding, particularly the affordable living aspect as opposed to affordable housing, because you're exactly right. What I want to know is, how do we protect, or what are our thoughts? And I'm sure you've thought about it. I don't want Councilwoman Dotley's neighborhoods, who are all well-intentioned, to end up fighting gentrification, which is what has happened downtown, has happened all over. this area. So there's a yin yang to it. And because we have such we have a problem here. What are your thoughts about how her neighborhoods, I don't know how many own their homes, how many are renting their homes. I want her dream to become a reality for her district. And yet money talks. What have we thought about how to protect the neighborhoods and make them even better? Have we thought about that? Because it's a free market.
Yes, yes, ma'am. So in addition to making sure that as many residents as possible know about the senior tax freeze and making sure that eligible residents are able to participate in the tax freeze, my opinion is that the single best way to help protect some of the residents from gentrification is through a community land trust. And that is something that we as an administration have been thinking through and are actively in the process of working through now with some of our nonprofit affordable housing partners. But I think in going back and looking at some of the neighborhoods where we have seen lots of gentrification, so for example, along Main Street, for example, Main Street is a thriving community, but there has been a significant amount of gentrification over the years.
Displacement.
Correct.
yeah.
Displacement. Yes. The thing, and it's probably not the only thing, but I think one of the things that could have made a difference would have been the establishment of a land trust in the beginning to allow for the protection of some of the residents who were already there. And so the city owns several vacant lots in Southside Gardens community. So the Southside Gardens and the Hooterville area could be as good a place as any for us to launch a community land trust. And I think that would be a good step in the right direction.
I think I just wanted to be sure that we thought about. And one last question, and then I'll be through, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Cora folks, Andrew, you made the comment that you were committed with or without a stadium. Did you mean to say that?
I'll answer it for him and ask him to come up too to shed more light.
Oh, I don't need a speech. I was just wondering because I
Sure.
made notes as
Yeah.
this was.
They're gonna do their phase one development no matter what.
Okay.
I think what they're exploring is whether or not to go to phases 2, 3, and beyond with the stadium. But I'll let Andrew come up and speak.
Yeah, I don't need a long. I was just curious
There's a
about
simple
that.
answer. If the stadium and the TIF district go into place, we'll move and develop all the way through the 11 acres.
Is that the 179 million?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if it doesn't come through, then there's not a commitment for 107. It makes perfect sense. I'm just trying to get it straight. Thank you.
Chip, you got one question.
I've got one question that's got two parts to it. Jermaine, the $72 million estimated for the cost of the stadium, is there a contingency built in for overruns and cost that weren't expected?
Yes, I'll let Brent come up and talk a little bit about that. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, we can provide more detailed information, but that is a good cost estimate based on what we know things have cost for other stadiums. Obviously, there's fluctuation in materials and
So
labor
is
and
there a
everything else.
10% contingency built in? Or?
Well, it's not. We don't necessarily have. We don't have a construction budget yet, right? The $72 million is the amount that we will issue bonds for. We will develop a construction budget at the time we issue bonds based on the cost of materials, cost of labor. We can also build infrastructure in the stadium and not build other things if it comes to that later on and add those on later, depending on where we are with cost. Of course, we've talked about, what if we have a recession? Well, that will help us from a construction standpoint. It might hurt us on a rating standpoint a little bit, but it's going to help us on cost. But for the most part, the 72 million is the general amount that we estimate that we'll need for construction. We don't have as much of a constraint on the site as other stadiums have, like Knoxville and other stadiums that are much more constrained to a smaller footprint, have to build more vertically. But overall, yeah, yes, there will be a contingency built in when we do a full construction budget.
Okay. And then the stadium, I would assume, would be incentive enough, but I'm going to ask this question. Is there any anticipation that the administration has of giving any kind of incentive to private development past the development of the stadium?
No, well, I mean, because infrastructure could be reimbursed if it's publicly owned infrastructure. So if, for example, public roads, if a developer builds a public road, they could get reimbursed later from the TIF, which is the case with all TIFs. But debt service has to be covered first. Capital reserve account has to be covered next, which is, putting money from increment into an account for 30 years from now. And then the next priority is Alton Park Connector, funding for that. And then once enough increments been generated for all those things, future increments. So if we do get up to $1 billion in development, the city and county in theory could get paid back for any money we put in. The developers could get paid back for any public infrastructure they built. But that's the case with every TIF that we have currently. We are not planning any pilots at this time. The developers could utilize tools from the Affordable Housing Initiative that we've talked about. That's a possibility, but we're not planning any other big specific incentives.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Chip. Thank you all for your presentation. I love especially the presentation around the work you all are doing in other cities and states. I'm also, you all opened up the opportunity for investors to be a part of the Lookouts, and which opened up opportunity for Black people to become a part of that. So I really appreciated that and seeing that and reading about it. I'm a baseball fan. I play softball. And the one piece that I would have loved for you guys to talk about was the Ingalls Stadium, a historic site where Lookouts used to play before they moved to the AT&T field. I attended all those games with my grandfather. And when you think about the greats that I often heard about who had the opportunity to play at Ingalls Stadium, when you think about Jackie Robinson, when you think about Babe Ruth, when you think about Hank Aaron, all those stories, I used to hold on to my grandfather's coattail because he was able to witness them to play at Ingalls Stadium when they was over at Lincoln Park and we Black people could not go to Warner Park to play. That's the significance of it. No one said a word when they decided to relocate the Lookouts to the AT&T field. No one said, hey, what's the rush? But we can only imagine what could have taken place if they would have built a new stadium around that site. Can you imagine the development that would have happened in this predominantly Black community at the time? So we relocate to downtown. Everybody was it was a celebration. It was like opening up your first Christmas present. Now we're talking about the stadium at this old Wheeling Foundry site where a lot of Black families had the opportunity to work at this site. And we see the condition on what it looks like now. And we know what that development is going to do for that community as well. Again, another Black community who can benefit from it. So, and I echo what Councilwoman Dottley is saying for her district. They want development and a fire starter, a catalyst to come to this area. However, they do want to remain to be a part of the community. I'm excited about what's taking place. Constituents or people that I've talked to, what they have voiced is that every time it's an opportunity for upward mobility in Black communities, there always seems to be a lot of noise around it. And I think that we should be at a place by now to where we should be embracing everybody in every community and helping everybody begin to thrive and be inclusive, as Cord said, that we're about. But every time it comes to the Black community, conversation always centers around the poverty mindset of why we shouldn't invest or do something to move the community forward. And that's what saddens me the most. I love that this stadium will be used as a mixed event venue Ingle Stadium was that, at one time, it was that venue. We had concerts. My first concert, in fact, was the Salt and Pepper concert. Dougie Fresh, Slick Rick, Kwame. Oh, y'all, I done took y'all all the way back, but we had some great times at the Ingle Stadium. And I'm sure that we'll recreate those same memories once this new stadium is built and the development. And so I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. Hopefully I'll be still in Chattanooga living once it's complete or once the process get even halfway done. But I can imagine what at that time the fun or the games that my granddaughter will be able to attend. And just one last thing that I would like to say to Andrew, I just want to add a couple of more streets, Cord, to your list since you in Chattanooga, Brainerd Road, Glass Street, Turner Boulevard, and Wilcox. Feel free, you can call me, we can tour each one of those streets. Since you got this disposable income and you want to pay, into communities, hey, let's come look, get you a landmark in District 9. Again, thank you all for your presentation, and I'm looking forward to this development happening. Adjourn to 6.
This is good. But thank y'all so much for investing. Yes. Yeah, I'm very when I'm telling you, my neighborhoods are like, when are they starting? I'm like, well, we're moving. So they are really excited because they know it's just growth they hadn't seen in years.